my first inclination would not to do workshops about blue sky thinking, oh, we could have this, we could have that.
Yeah.
I would definitely start from the user first to say, okay, what is it that is your biggest pain point and how can we fix it quickly?
Mm-hmm.
And the second part is really start from the blueprint, meaning what is it that SAP SuccessFactors or the vendors to deliver from the shelf, and start with that. See what is it that you need to add on and what purpose is it really going to serve.
Xavier, welcome to the show. How are you?
Very good.
Nice to see you.
And how are you?
Before we jump into the podcast in more detail, tell everyone a little bit more about you personally and your journey to the role you're in now.
Yeah, sure. So originally I'm from Brussels, Belgium. That's where I grew up and where I started with my initial roles. Then I moved to Paris, France in 2006. And I've worked since then in a wide array of companies. I mean, mostly American multinationals. And eventually I landed in the role that I'm currently having right now with L'Occitane, which is based in Geneva, Switzerland.
I'm so happy you said the company name because I was definitely going to get that wrong. the pronunciation.
You're not the only one.
Yeah. Tell everyone a little bit more about the business if they're not aware of the company.
I guess, most of your listeners would know about L'Occitane as a brand. So L'Occitane en Provence, yellow company, quite visible in the airports. What most people don't know is actually L'Occitane is a group that has been growing by acquisition, and it's doing cosmetics. We have 8 brands, which are Arborian, Melvita, Crown Alchemist, LMS, L'Occitane au Brésil, L'Occitane en Provence, and they are all active with let's say the mission of the group is that we want to be a force for good, that we want to be a company that's a regenerative company, which has a positive footprint on its ecosystem, on the environment, and on its people.
How long have you been with the company now?
A bit more than 9 years, actually.
Wow, that's unusual in this day and age. Typically, it's like 2 to 3 years now. What would you say has kept you engaged so long in the business?
The fact is that the company has been growing tremendously in the last years by acquisition, by development internationally. And definitely, my role has been de facto changing from when I started. I was initially just in charge of rewards, and then gradually I went into global mobility, into HR information systems. And I would say the second thing is really, the culture. The company is really strong about entrepreneurship and really keeping people really empowered in the roles. And they really want to make sure that basically you are always growing and doing new things. So I can safely say there wasn't any year that looked like the previous year because of what has been going on in the business. They're keeping him a bit busy and challenging me to
different roles,
to do different things, different roles to explore.
How does your role work then? Obviously you're looking after global rewards and the HRIS. Is that across all of the companies? Is it across one of the companies? How does that work? If it's decentralized, how does that work?
Well, we work globally for the 8 brands.
Okay.
What is going to be different brand by brand and BU by BU is the speed at which we can progress. So it's never going to be one size fits all. It's never going to be like big bang kind of deployment. The idea is really to basically adjust our pace to the pace that the business can follow. Just to take an example, when we rolled out SuccessFactors, which is our HRIS system, we started with L'Occitane en Provence, Arborian and Melvita, which were the brands that were the more integrated. And then we have been doing a staggered rollout, starting by the largest subsidiaries and then going to the smaller subsidiaries when we saw that we really had enough experience to be able to do something that wasn't requiring too much of the effort. So the idea is really find the right windows of opportunity and the right partners and adjust the kind of solution that you are delivering to your internal clients. Because Of course, I mean, you're not going to talk to a brand leader, which is a fast growing company, but with only 300 employees, than with a larger brand, which is in all the different areas of the world when they need maybe the full suite of solution that you're proposing.
Yeah. How does that work then? Break it down for us a little bit. So when you acquire those companies, are you having to roll it out time and time again? So have you had to roll out success factors multiple times across multiple business units, etc.?
I mean, when we acquire the different brands, we always get into a dialogue with the business leader, the HR function, to say, okay, why do we need to start? And we have a catalog that basically we offer. We say, okay, we can do this, we can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And we then discuss and agree with them to say, well, we're going to start by the foundations of the house, which is like the core HR, employee central and success factor. We're going to do job grading. We're going to do this. We're going to do that to have basically a joined up roadmap where we can say, okay, in 1 year, in 2 years, in 3 years, we're going to be on track for complete integration.
At what part of the merger do you come in? Because I've always found that, like in my conversations in the past, normally happens too late, which leads to a lot of frustration and many challenges. When do you come into the picture?
You know, I don't think there is such a thing as the right the right way to come in, because it's always, I guess there is always a tension, like, yes, we would like to be really involved into, you know, the early discussions, but quite often timing is of the essence.
Mm-hmm.
And quite often what we see is that really what's going to make the difference is the way we are able to position ourselves with the brands, because most of the brands that we acquire, they are really fast growing brands that we can't address in the same way than L'Occitane en Provence, which is, you know, a much more steady, established brand where they don't have the same type of issues. So it's really, I would say the main challenge that I've seen is really being able to build trust and to connect really to the business needs, and not to come like, oh, we have a recipe that worked for L'Occitane en Provence and we're going to try to make you adopt the same recipe.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the reverse. It's us really adapting to their needs and what really matters to them first and foremost.
What would be your sort of top main, let's say top 3 pieces of advice you'd give to someone who's having to implement HRIS systems across multiple brands and business units?
Quite often what I see is being neglected is really the scoping of the project. And what I mean by that is really to have an honest discussion with the stakeholders around the table to really understand what is it that they already have in terms of processes, and what is it that they want to either get from the shelf or that they want to really design in a bespoke way.
Give me an example of that.
Well, for instance, I mean, if you take, for instance, like compensation, SuccessFactors is a pretty robust module which really manage your bonus payment, your salary increase. Some brands, I mean, say, oh, we have something that is working quite well on Excel. We have another piece of software that can do this and that. If you just come in saying, oh, but we have really this compensation module, which really is coming from the shelf, without really understanding what is it that they have been using so far, what were the pain points, what were the benefits, what was the cost to the business, then it can become a challenging conversation. I would advise to really start not from the solution, but start really from the processes and the business needs, and then go into the solution, having clarity of what is the outcome that you want to achieve by implementing that solution. Defining what good looks like first, and then going into the technical issues seconds.
Because I can imagine it can be quite tempting to say, hey, we're cutting all of that cost, just use ours.
Yeah.
And then, but you don't really understand the unintended consequences of that, which I'm sure you've made that mistake perhaps in the past and realized, oh, actually, this is the way we need to approach this.
And speaking of mistake, I mean, I have to admit that something that we did, and I did definitely initially, was asking our colleagues, what is it that you want?
Oh God, you're gonna get 1,000 answers from every different.
Exactly. And when you go into basically a collection of, oh, we need this and this feature, I mean, the risk is really coming up with a kind of behemoth of information that no one will be using. What I found to be much more useful is to say, here is the baseline that we need. Here is the minimum information that we need to make the module run. And what is it that you would need in addition to this? And what would be its purpose? Because at the end of the day, I mean, I think we are all guilty of the fact that we want to have like the latest gadgets, we want to have the latest features. But most of the time, it's like when you use your phone, you always use like the 5 same apps,
Same
maybe
thing.
6, 7, and the other ones, I mean, why bother about them in the first place? And I think that's where we kind of flipped the approach to say, well, again, let's not try to be feature driven, but really be really driven by what is the outcome that we want to achieve.
When are people going through this process? Who are the decision makers that have to be at that table to make this really work?
That's a very good question. I would say it's really, at least in my view, super important that you get, of course, I mean, each on the table, that you get your IT people so that they can guide you in terms of, what is feasible, what is not feasible in terms of architecture, what can be supported. But I would say first and foremost, some people that will be the voice of the customer. For instance, when you want to implement a recruiting module, you need to have recruiters, you need to have people representing candidates, you need to have people managers, because they will be the one using performance management, compensation management. And that's also something that we have been engaging when we went to agile transformation in the team. We started with typical kind of waterfall project management, and then we went with a Scrum squad. And I've really seen the benefit of that, of really doing the voice of customer, the return of experience, to really understand, well, we deployed this feature, great, but do people really use it? And sometimes it's really surprising to say there are some things that maybe you think are really non-essential that people really value. And on the other end, you deploy a new feature that you find amazing from an expertise point of view.
No one uses it.
But most managers, I mean...
So I was surprised actually that you mentioned line managers, but it makes so much sense. Like, why would you not have the end users in the meeting? But I'm sure that's a mistake that many companies make. They assume that they know what's going to be required and needed, and miss some of the probably most important things that they're using day in, day out, as well. So having those people in the conversation makes so much sense. And anyone else that we've missed?
I mean, at some stage, it's really good to have executive sponsorship as well, to make sure like they understand why you are launching this initiative and they can really see what a product is all about. Because one thing is doing a slide deck, the other thing is really seeing the solution working. And that's also where you can sell to say, okay, these are the foundations. And quite often what you see in the foundations might not be super impressive, but you're also able to sell the vision. And what I mean by that, concretely speaking, is like before we had HRIS implemented, we didn't have a clear view of basic things like headcount, employee turnover. And now we have, of course, I mean, all these fundamentals in terms of, being able to count how many people are in the company, but also making sense of employee turnover, of time to fill in recruitment, and drilling down into the details of what are the root cause which are impacting positively or negatively each of the factors. And I think that's really the vision that you want to sell as a HR expert, to say it's not only about reporting. Of course, reporting compliance, it's important, but what is really of the essence is, well, it's going to be a decision-making system that's going to help you make decisions not only based on gut feeling, but based on facts and figures, based on evidence.
In terms of the team and the decision making, how do you find those people? Like, how did you go about which people managers do I select? Which person do I go to for executive sponsorship? What's your thinking around that?
I would say, I mean, just going in the field and talking to people.
Okay.
It might seem a bit simplistic, but
fair
I
enough.
mean, I remember when we launched the recruiting module, we went after a few months, we toured different countries, and we just went in different boutiques to talk with people that were candidates and no employees, with hiring managers. And we discussed with them and say, oh, what's your experience? What were the friction points? What went well, not so well? And I would say sometimes the trap can be to really refer to anecdotes, to only ask a few trusted people, and the risk is that you might be having, an echo effect when people
A
tell you
hundred
what you
percent.
want to hear.
Yeah.
The great thing is that when you have quite a wide sample in terms of different positions in the company, geographies, when you get a mix of people who say really interesting things in the sense that they can give you specific feedback, some of it is also critical. I think that's when you get like the golden nuggets. When you hear the things that you don't want to hear, that's where normally I start listening closely, because I say, well, if they are telling this, it's because it really matters to them and they want to improve the product.
Yeah. If anything, you want to surround yourself with, as many people as possible that, it sounds strange, that disagree, that have different views, perspectives, and insights, because you need that diversity of thought and
Yeah,
perspective,
yeah,
right? If you're only sitting in a
yeah.
room listening to your team, they're just, it's going to be an echo, like you just said. And you'll make a huge mistake by going down that route. In terms of decision making as well, I also wanted to understand, one of the big challenges for our listeners is, who do they choose, right? As a HRIS, is it SAP SuccessFactors? Is it Workday? And there's a couple of new ones that are coming up. Oracle, of course, Oracle HCM Cloud. How did you make a decision? Why SAP SuccessFactors?
I mean, today there is a real wide array of solutions that you
Yes.
can buy from, and I'm really convinced that there is not one that is really like the golden nuggets. It's really what is good for you in terms of like size of your company, the way your processes are being designed. To focus really on why is it that we chose SuccessFactor, I would say first they were really quite flexible in terms of the fact that you can buy modules. You don't need to buy the full suite and do a big bang deployment. For us, because of decentralization, everything I
You need
explained
that
before,
flexibility, yeah.
we need that flexibility. And also, without being too technical, the thing also is that they are quite happy to have the payroll system being the primary source of information, when other systems ask that your HIS would be the primary source. And we felt, for a variety of reasons, that it was, in terms of change management, much better to really have the payroll as the master, and to have the secondary source of information being our HRIS system. I would say these were really the two main reasons that were driving the choice.
And which of the modules are you using versus external technology?
Today we are using the full suite with the exception of the learning and development module.
What are you using for that, like Cornerstone or something along those lines?
We use cross knowledge.
Oh, cross knowledge, yeah.
Yep, yep.
Yeah, nice. And what did that implementation plan look like? Because that's always the thing. It's buying the software is the easy part. the implementation of that, and of course the the cultural change and everything else along the way. How long did it take you to deploy?
I mean, that's a great question, because it was a bit of a bumpy road, if I'm really honest with you, because it never goes like you anticipated. We started implementing recruitment first, and then we have done Employee Central, so core HR second. The reason for that is that we wanted to deliver something that's going to deliver visible outcome directly, where core HR is not something that you can really see what are the immediate benefits. And then we have been doing performance, succession planning, and compensation management. And we have done this over the course of 6 years, which is quite a long time. I would say the benefit of doing this is that it wasn't a rushed exercise, and the adoption level that we see on all the modules are pretty high when we look at, the pre and the post. In terms of, for instance, performance management, we had some pockets of the business where in any given year we had like maximum 60% of employees having an error review. Now we are in excess of 90%.
Wow. So when you say bumpy road, I just want to be clear, is it in terms of the way you implement it internally, or something to do with the system? These are the things that people need to hear that they don't know about.
I wouldn't say it was the system, because the system, I would say, offers much more than what we consume. I mean, it's like if you drive a Ferrari, I mean, you need to pass your driving test. But most ferry owners are not gonna, drive it on a racetrack. And
I
sometimes I
get it.
think
I
it's
get
a
it.
bit
I
like
get
that
what you're saying.
with,
So
with the solution. The main challenge that we had was really aligning the countries on what this could look like and on a similar process. When you take, for instance, like performance management, before we went into the system, every business unit had their own timeline, form with specific developments. Initially, what they said is we want the same thing. And when we look at what would be the cost of doing 5 different forms versus doing one form that we translate in different languages,
sure.
I mean, the gap was, you know, 10,000s of euros. So we say, I mean, that's not happening. We need to basically put our thinking cap on and to understand why is it that we think we need to have, as one company, 5 different forms. Basically, the outcome was that there wasn't really a very good reason why we need to have this.
Yeah.
So it was also a great opportunity to relook at the way we're doing things and to say where we need to have localization. The difficult part is really understanding that actually most of the things that the business wants to continue to do is because it has always been done this way, and it can be changed and it should be changed.
Yeah.
Because when you survey your users, because that's always a driver, what they were saying is to say, I don't really understand. I'm a global director. I've my team's split in all these different geographies. Why is it that they have 5 different forms? I don't get it.
Mm.
So we said, well, we're gonna listen to you and just do one form, and that went pretty well.
So the bumpy road really was relation to the strategy internally to make sure you were, and of course you're going to uncover these challenges along the way, right? You can't know all of this from the beginning. So,
No,
and I think
no.
that's a good lesson for everyone to listen. You can prepare and you can create a plan, but you're going to find these are nuances to your business, right? Like you just said earlier, like these are every company is going to have specific ways of their setup and processes and requirements along the
Yeah,
way as well. What looking back, what would you have done differently to make this a smoother process?
I would say something that I was kind of ignorant to because I grew up, which is a witness of my old age, in an environment where people were doing on-premise system, where
Mm,
you can do a lot of customization. When you go in the cloud, basically you need to be as standard as you can be. So I would say my first inclination would not to do workshops about blue sky thinking, oh, we could have this, we could have that. I
yeah.
would definitely start from the user first to say, okay, what is it that is your biggest pain point and how can we fix it quickly?
Mm-hmm.
And the second part is really start from the blueprint, meaning what is it that SAP SuccessFactors or the vendors to deliver from the shelf, and start with that. See what is it that you need to add on and what purpose is it really going to serve?
Yeah.
Because you're going to save yourself a lot of trouble by really starting
Yeah.
small and doing the basics. And then you can always add on further. But what I think is really key for the project not to suffocate is to be able to deliver quickly and to
Mm-hmm.
get feedback from your users, and then to improve, to do a second version, a third version, a fourth version. And because it's cloud based, I mean, you can activate, deactivate the function quite easily. But what people really want to see quickly is your core services. Because if you announce, oh, we have purchased something, and it takes you months and months and months to deliver the first version, that's why you lose traction normally.
Yeah, you need those quick wins. What are your thoughts on obviously every company in the last couple of months in this space have all launched their own AI, right? You know, you've seen everyone the announcements. Like based on what you know with the product and what they have announced,
Yeah,
which ones can you see yourself actually benefiting from, you and the team
I,
using practically?
I would say my opinion on it is quite split. I would say on one end, I think it's kind of underestimated what the level of potential disruption it's gonna cause for the white collar,
Mm-hmm.
because I think so far we have seen a lot of disruption happening that were impacting blue collars, like your different chains of like home delivery services and so on. I think now we are seeing something where I think it's quite clear that we have some clerical jobs which will be highly at risk due to a chat GPT, for
Mm-hmm.
instance. So I think that's something where maybe we are not seeing yet that there is a massive investment to be done in terms of workforce upskilling if we don't want to end up with a huge unemployment issue, I think, midterm. And the second part, I think sometimes it's a bit overplayed, where I see a lot of vendors, and I won't call any names, saying, oh, we do AI this, we do AI that, we do big data this and big data that. For me, there is a bit of a schism because on one end, yes, I mean, you see very large tech companies doing a lot of things, but I think that's a very small ecosystem. And I see a lot of large non-tech companies which are still doing everything on Excel spreadsheets. And if I have one thing to say is maybe before going into like dreaming about AI, about big data, make sure that the foundations are really robust and that your clients really understand what kind of problem you are solving for them. But because I think it's really easy to be seduced by a very shiny object, but is it really for your own curiosity, or is it really solving an issue for your clients? I think that's the main question we need to ask ourselves.
What's next for you now as you, because I think one of the things we spoke about when we last had our conversation was when, how do you then take what you've done, but also then at the same time create a data-driven culture that helps serve the business goals? How are you, what is your focus there? How are you creating a data-driven culture?
I'm really glad that we have been going to this whole journey of, establishing the basics in terms of having Employee Central, having the full suite, because now the thing is that we have quite sufficient history depth and capabilities to be looking, if I just take one example, employee turnover. I mean, most of our people out of 10,000 globally, we have 7,000 employees which are in the field, our beauty advisors working in our shops. And what we see is that in some geographies, our level of voluntary turnover, it's much higher than what we wish it would be. And really by looking at different cohorts of employees to say, well, these people that we recruited in the last 12 months, what do we see is happening to them in terms of retention? And why is it that they are staying? And why is it that they are leaving? And what are the common patterns that we are finding in the people which are leaving and staying? And that's something which for us is completely new, because in the past it was very much like we assumed that it was
you had no
turnover.
Data. You had no data, right?
We had no data, and we're coming from a place to say, well, it's kind of happening to us. And I think the good thing about being really data driven, it's really helping you to say, well, of course, I mean, when there's been COVID, when there's been, different issues, you see that suddenly, people don't move and they start moving again. So yes, there is a part of reality which you can't control, which is market driven,
Sure.
but there are a lot of things that you can influence and that you should be influencing to make sure that people are happy to stay with the company. And that's where, by having this data driven approach, by really delving into like exit interviews in terms of time to fill, in terms of how does our pay compare with the markets, I mean, by crossing all these kind of variables, I mean, we have seen in some areas, well, when we have done this, suddenly voluntary turnover is dropping. So let's continue to do more of that.
What are been some of the biggest challenges that you've personally faced in terms of your own development and growth as the technology evolves? You're becoming more data driven, your roles changed and expanded, as you mentioned many times. What are some of the big challenges that you've personally overcome that perhaps our audience will probably hit that wall one day?
The biggest challenge I've faced is, thinking that people were on the same page I was, or taking things for granted. One example I have is like, for me as a HR professional, it's just obvious that there is a cost avoidance, sometimes a cost saving, but mostly a cost avoidance to reducing employee voluntary turnover. It's something which, when I was talking with partners in finance from line management, for them, it wasn't obvious at all. So I had really to say, okay, let's look at a model. Let's look at what the literature, don't take my word for it, but what this literature, there have been people working on this, doing studies, looking at what are the direct costs, but also the indirect costs that you will suffer as a business if you have too high of a turnover. And it's really being happy and eager to break it down and to speak the language that people that you are working with can hear and can understand, and not to come with sometimes. I think maybe the risk when you come from a place of expertise, you say, oh yeah, we need to have this, we need to have this piece of software, we need to do that, and not really starting to say, what is the context, and more importantly, why is it that we need to do it? What's going to be the benefit for you of doing this before going into, oh, we need to implement this, we need to implement that, because you take for granted that the other person comes from the same line of thinking that you do.
I think that's part of your evolution there as well, to become more of a strategic business partner, right? An advisor, as opposed to taking order, as opposed to the traditional HR function being an order taker. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So I
it
think that's
does.
part of your evolution, right? You've built that credibility, you've built the experience and knowledge to say, hey, this is, and then you provide the research, the insights, the experience you have. And that's also going to reflect on how they see you and the function and the team, right? As much more strategic advisors as opposed to just order takers. So that's great.
Yeah.
That's great to hear, but that takes time as well, right? To do that. And that's also a cultural shift in depending on what company you're in as well, moving to be
Yeah.
strategic advisors as opposed to just order takers.
Yeah, and something that I like to say over and over to my colleagues and to my team is that we are all in the business of selling. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah, of
something that
course.
I've been,
Yeah.
I've been working in different, when you work in the industry and production business, I mean, you're not like really super attuned to sales, but when you are into, I mean, L'Occitane, quite often I take that as a metric, how many tubes of hand cream do we need to sell to fund this? And at the end of the day, I mean, what we need to do is to sell. And when you sell, I mean, one vision of this is oh, you try just to do revenue. I think the more long-term strategy of selling is solving problems for people. You see so many bad salespeople selling you a solution, and the great salespeople, they always start by asking you why you, what are the main things, and to understand your problem. And once you are being sold that your problem is worth solving, you're ready to pay anything to have that problem solved.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what keeps me going, is really say, what kind of big, airy problem can I solve for you?
There's no easy way to do that apart from genuinely building relationships, having conversations with each of those stakeholders. Yes, you've got the overall business challenges, but understanding what the individual challenges for those stakeholders are, what's sort of their buttons, their hot buttons, as we call it in sales, and which one, and linking that back, then you're going to get much more buy-in results, and they're going to be engaged in the process because they understand the outcome's going to benefit them as well.
Exactly.
Before I let you go, parting piece of advice. What we've covered so much, but when we talk about going through, we've kind of really focused a lot on the sort of HRIS implementation, the strategies piece. But if there was kind of one thing you want people to take away from it that's most important for going through that process, what would that be? And then we'll say goodbye.
Well, I mean, I'm gonna quote Stephen Covey by saying, "Start with the end in mind." Really, what is the outcome that you want to achieve? Be clear about the outcome and rally your supporters to make sure they share the vision. Because initially, it's always, how hard can it be to do this? And once you go into implementation, you say, well,
as you
I mean,
realized.
if I knew it would be so hard, I would have never done it.
Don't say that; you're going to scare everyone away. But yeah, no.
It's quite often, I mean, the way it works, I mean, to be honest, where you go to like, ups and downs during the process. But I think when you have this kind of shared vision, it really helps to go to the low phases because you know where you're heading to. And I would say, in addition to that, really define what's going to be the first goalpost that you want to hit, and to really be, I think, being in that kind of iterative approach, even if that sometimes can be challenging because you are really always delivering, testing, listening to your customers. I mean, in terms of adoption, that's going to help you much better than doing a typical waterfall project, where the risk is that you go into a kind of tunnel effect, then you deliver, and you say, "Oh, the adoption is not there. What happened?"
Yeah.
And having this kind of iterative loop with your internal clients is, for me, I mean, the main thing. Which, at the end of the day, it's going to be the element saying, "Did my product succeed? Well, how many people are using it?" I had a colleagues who said, "Well, the easy way to know if your system is working, you unplug it for a week, and if no one is complaining about it, well, maybe your system isn't that useful for them."
Well, listen, I appreciate you coming on the show. I'm glad we got into this topic. We don't kind of talk about this enough on the podcast. We try to talk about all of the more sexier, maybe perhaps topics that people are talking about, but these fundamentals are literally the foundation of everything else, right? To your point, and great practical advice that you shared. Obviously, it's a journey as well, right? This doesn't end
It
after
is.
6 months.
It is very much.
It's continuous. Even now, right? I'm sure you're continuing to improve things. It's a longer
Yeah.
process as well. So, listen, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. It
No,
was a pleasure on my end.
yeah, we'll do it again soon. All the best until then, and have an amazing holiday break.